At Lincoln High School, the hallways were alive with the usual hum of activity. Students hurried to their next class, chatting and laughing as they went. Teachers moved between classrooms, clutching lesson plans and textbooks, while the occasional announcement crackled over the intercom. It was an ordinary day, or so it seemed. In the faculty lounge, a small group of teachers had gathered during their lunch break. The room smelled faintly of coffee and stale sandwiches, but no one seemed to mind. This was their space, a place where they could relax for a few moments before diving back into the chaos of teaching teenagers. Among them was Rachel Dawson, a math teacher known for her sharp mind and quick wit. Rachel loved puzzles, riddles, and anything that challenged her brain. She often joked that solving problems was her second job, right after teaching algebra. On this particular afternoon, Rachel had brought something special to share with her colleagues. She pulled out her phone and showed them a puzzle she'd found online. It was called the Impossible IQ Challenge, and according to the website, it had stumped some of the brightest minds in the world. The challenge involved deciphering a series of intricate patterns and logic sequences, each more difficult than the last. It wasn't just about math or language skills. It required creativity, patience, and the ability to think outside the box. Rachel scrolled through the screen, explaining the rules of the puzzle to the others. "You have to figure out the missing piece in each sequence," she said, pointing to a particularly tricky example. "It's supposed to be nearly unsolvable." Her audience leaned in, intrigued. Mr. Carter, the physics teacher, adjusted his glasses and squinted at the screen. He prided himself on being one of the smartest people in the school, and he couldn't resist a good intellectual challenge. "Nearly unsolvable?" he repeated with a smirk. "Let me see this so-called impossible puzzle." As Rachel handed him her phone, another teacher chimed in. "Good luck, Carter. If anyone can solve it, it's probably you." The comment earned a round of laughter from the group. Everyone knew how competitive Mr. Carter could be, especially when it came to proving his intelligence. But despite his confidence, Mr. Carter frowned as he studied the puzzle. After a minute, he shook his head and handed the phone back to Rachel. Maybe not so easy after all," he admitted reluctantly. His tone carried a hint of frustration, which only made the others laugh harder. Rachel grinned triumphantly. "See? I told you it's impossible. Well, almost impossible." She glanced around the table, clearly enjoying the attention. "I bet none of us could solve it, not even our esteemed physics guru here." The conversation continued, with everyone taking turns, trying and failing to crack the code. Some gave up quickly, while others stared at the screen for minutes, determined to find the answer. But no matter how hard they tried, the solution eluded them. Eventually, the group decided to move on, agreeing that the puzzle was far too difficult for mere mortals. Just as they were wrapping up their discussion, Joe Miller entered the room. Joe was the school janitor, a quiet man in his late 40s, with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor. He wore a simple uniform, dark pants, a blue shirt, and sturdy boots, and carried a plastic bin filled with cleaning supplies. His presence was familiar and unobtrusive. Most days, people barely noticed him as he went about his work. Joe nodded politely at the teachers as he walked past, heading toward the corner of the room to empty the trash bins. He didn't say much, preferring to stay in the background. But today something caught his ear. As he passed by the table, he heard Rachel talking about the puzzle. "Honestly," she said with a chuckle, "I don't think anyone in this whole school could solve it, not even Joe." The comment was lighthearted, meant as a joke rather than an insult. Still, it made Joe pause. He turned slightly, glancing at the group. They were laughing, completely unaware of how their words might sound to someone outside their circle. For a moment, Joe considered saying something, but then thought better of it. Instead, he finished emptying the trash and quietly left the room. Later that evening, long after the students and teachers had gone home, Joe returned to the faculty lounge. The room was silent now, lit only by the soft glow of overhead lights. He grabbed a mop from his cart and began cleaning the floor, moving methodically from one side of the room to the other. But his mind kept drifting back to the puzzle Rachel had shown earlier, Curiosity tugged at him. What exactly did the challenge look like? Was it really as impossible as everyone claimed? Joe wasn't sure why he cared so much. It wasn't like anyone expected him to solve it. Yet there was something about the idea of a supposedly unsolvable problem that intrigued him. After finishing his cleaning duties, Joe wandered over to the table where Rachel had left her phone earlier. To his surprise, the puzzle sheet was still there, printed out on a single sheet of paper. Someone must have forgotten to take it with them. Joe hesitated for a moment, then picked it up. The page was covered in diagrams, numbers, and symbols, arranged in ways that seemed random at first glance. But as Joe studied it, patterns began to emerge. Slowly, carefully, he started working through the challenge in his head. There was no pressure, no expectation, just the quiet satisfaction of trying to unravel a mystery. Growing up, Joe had always enjoyed puzzles. When he was younger, he used to spend hours poring over crossword books and logic games, finding joy in the process of discovery. Life had taken him down different paths since then, leading him to jobs like this one, where he spent his days maintaining order in a busy high school. But deep down, that love for problem-solving had never faded. Now standing alone in the dimly lit faculty lounge, Joe felt a spark of excitement. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a pen, jotting down notes on the back of the puzzle sheet. Time slipped away as he worked, oblivious to everything else around him. For the first time in years, he felt completely absorbed in something, lost in the thrill of the chase. By the time Joe finally looked up, the clock on the wall read 9:30 p.m. He blinked, surprised to realize how much time had passed. Shaking his head, he folded the sheet of paper and tucked it into his pocket. Tomorrow, he thought, I'll come back to it tomorrow. With that, Joe switched off the lights and locked the door behind him. As he walked down the empty hallway, the echo of his footsteps the only sound, he couldn't help but smile. Little did he know, the events of this evening would set off a chain reaction that would change everything, for him and for the entire school. The next morning, Joe Miller arrived at Lincoln High School earlier than usual. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft golden light over the quiet hallways. Most of the staff wouldn't arrive for another hour, and the students were still fast asleep in their beds. It was Joe's favorite time of day, a moment of peace before the chaos of the school day began. As he pushed his cleaning cart down the corridor, Joe's thoughts kept drifting back to the puzzle. He had tucked the sheet into his pocket the night before, but it felt like it was weighing more heavily on him now. He couldn't stop thinking about the patterns he'd started to notice, the way certain numbers seemed to connect in unexpected ways. It wasn't just curiosity driving him anymore. It was something deeper, a quiet determination to see if he could actually solve it. Joe decided to take a detour to the faculty lounge before starting his usual rounds. The room was empty, just as he expected, and he sat down at one of the small, round tables. Pulling the crumpled puzzle sheet from his pocket, he smoothed it out carefully and stared at it again. The symbols and diagrams looked just as complicated as they had the night before, but Joe didn't feel intimidated. Instead, he felt calm, almost excited, as though he were standing at the edge of a mystery waiting to be unraveled. He grabbed a pen and began jotting down notes on the margins of the paper. At first, his handwriting was neat and orderly, but as his ideas flowed faster, the scribbles became messier. Numbers, arrows, and little sketches filled the page, each one representing a new insight or connection. Joe worked methodically, testing theories and discarding ones that didn't fit. He didn't rush. He knew puzzles like this required patience. Hours passed without him noticing. By the time the first teachers started trickling into the lounge, Joe was so absorbed in his work that he barely registered their presence. Rachel Dawson was among them, carrying a cup of coffee and chatting with Mr. Carter. She spotted Joe sitting at the table, his head bent low over the puzzle sheet, and stopped mid-sentence. "What's he doing?" she whispered to Mr. Carter, nodding toward Joe. Her tone was half curious, half amused. Mr. Carter shrugged. "Beats me. Maybe he's trying to figure out what we were laughing about yesterday." Rachel smirked. "Well, good luck to him. Let's see how far he gets." Neither of them approached Joe or interrupted him. They assumed he was simply amusing himself, perhaps doodling or pretending to understand the challenge. No one seriously thought he might actually solve it. After all, Joe wasn't a teacher or a student, he was the janitor. To most people, his role was clear-cut: clean the floors, empty the trash, and keep the building running smoothly. That was it. But Joe didn't care what anyone thought. He was focused on the task in front of him, oblivious to the whispers and sideways glances. Slowly but surely, pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. Each breakthrough gave him a small surge of satisfaction, motivating him to push forward. By late morning, he believed he had cracked the final sequence. Joe leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. For a moment, he just stared at the sheet, double-checking his work to make sure he hadn't missed anything. Everything seemed to add up. The patterns made sense, the logic held together, and the solution felt right. A smile spread across his face. Against all odds, he had done it. Still, Joe hesitated. What should he do now? Should he tell someone? Or would it be better to keep it to himself? Part of him worried that no one would believe him, that they'd dismiss his answer as a fluke or assume he'd cheated somehow. But another part of him felt proud of what he'd accomplished. This wasn't just about proving himself. It was about sharing something meaningful with others. After a few minutes of deliberation, Joe decided to take a chance. He folded the puzzle sheet neatly and slipped it into his pocket. Then, grabbing his cleaning supplies, he resumed his duties, planning to wait for the right moment to reveal his discovery. Later that afternoon, the faculty lounge was bustling again. Teachers gathered around the table, grading papers, sipping coffee, and chatting about their day. Rachel was there too, scrolling through her phone while nibbling on an apple. When Joe entered the room, she barely glanced up. "Hey, Joe," she said casually. "How's it going?" "Good," Joe replied, nodding. He hesitated for a second, then added, "I wanted to show you something." Rachel raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite herself. "Oh yeah? What is it?" Joe reached into his pocket and pulled out the puzzle sheet. He placed it on the table in front of her, pointing to the notes he'd written in the margins. "I think I solved it," he said simply. For a moment, Rachel just stared at him, unsure how to respond. Was he serious? She glanced down at the sheet, scanning the numbers and symbols. At first glance, it looked plausible, but surely it couldn't be right. Could it? "You're joking, right?" she asked, her voice tinged with skepticism. "This thing is supposed to be impossible." "I don't joke about puzzles," Joe replied with a faint smile. Rachel frowned, torn between disbelief and curiosity. Finally, she picked up the sheet and studied it more closely. As she traced the sequences and compared them to Joe's solutions, her frown deepened, but not because she was confused. Something about his answers rang true. They were logical, consistent, and elegant in their simplicity. Unable to contain her surprise, Rachel turned to Joe. "Wait. Did you really solve this?" Joe nodded. "I think so. You can check it if you want." Rachel didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed her phone and opened the website where she'd originally found the puzzle. Scrolling through the instructions, she compared Joe's solution to the official answer key provided online. Her eyes widened as she realized that every single step matched perfectly. This is incredible," she murmured, looking up at Joe in awe. "You actually did it." The room fell silent as other teachers noticed the exchange. Mr. Carter leaned over Rachel's shoulder, peering at the screen. "What's going on?" he asked. "Joe solved the puzzle," Rachel said, her voice trembling slightly with excitement. "The impossible IQ challenge, he actually solved it." Mr. Carter blinked, clearly skeptical. "Are you sure? Let me see that." He took the phone from Rachel and examined the answer key himself. His expression shifted from doubt to disbelief, to reluctant admiration. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered under his breath. "He really did it." The news spread quickly. Within minutes, the entire faculty lounge was buzzing with astonishment. Teachers who had never paid much attention to Joe before were now clamoring to hear his explanation. How had he figured it out? What was his secret? Did he have some kind of hidden genius no one knew about? Joe, however, remained humble. When pressed for details, he shrugged and said, "It's just a matter of looking at things differently. Sometimes when you stop trying to force the answer, it comes to you naturally." His modesty only added to the intrigue. By the end of the day, the story of Joe's achievement had traveled beyond the faculty lounge, reaching the ears of students and administrators alike. Principal Alan Roberts heard about it during a meeting and immediately requested to speak with Joe. That evening, as Joe stood in the principal's office, he couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions: pride, nervousness, and a touch of disbelief. He had never imagined that solving a simple puzzle would lead to this kind of attention, but as Principal Roberts shook his hand and congratulated him, Joe realized something important. Sometimes taking a chance, even when no one believes in you, can lead to extraordinary results. Little did Joe know this was only the beginning. The ripple effects of his accomplishment would soon reach far beyond Lincoln High School, inspiring those around him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The next morning, the atmosphere at Lincoln High School felt different. Word of Joe Miller's achievement had spread like wildfire, and it seemed everyone was talking about it. Students whispered in the hallways, teachers exchanged knowing glances, and even the cafeteria staff couldn't stop discussing the genius janitor. For a school that thrived on routine, this was something entirely new and exciting. Joe, however, went about his day as if nothing unusual had happened. He arrived early, just as he always did, and began his usual tasks: sweeping floors, emptying trash bins, and wiping down tables. To him, solving the puzzle wasn't a big deal. It was simply something he enjoyed doing. But for everyone else, it was a revelation. The idea that the quiet man pushing a mop through the halls could outsmart a challenge designed to stump the brightest minds was almost too much to believe. By mid-morning, Joe's presence had become a magnet for attention. Several students approached him between classes, eager to ask questions or share their admiration. One of them was Emily Thompson, a sophomore who often struggled with her advanced math course. She had heard about Joe's accomplishment from her classmates and decided to thank him personally. "Hi, Mr. Miller," she said shyly, catching up to him near the science lab. "I just wanted to say, well, congratulations. What you did was really cool." Joe stopped what he was doing and turned to face her. His expression softened and he gave her a small smile. "Thank you, Emily. That means a lot." Encouraged by his kindness, Emily hesitated for a moment before blurting out, "Do you think you could help me with my math homework sometime? I've been having trouble keeping up and, well, if you can solve something like that puzzle, maybe you could teach me how to look at problems differently." Joe didn't answer right away. He hadn't expected anyone to ask for his help, especially not a student. For years he had kept to himself, content to stay in the background. But looking at Emily now, her hopeful eyes and nervous fidgeting, he realized he couldn't say no. There was something genuine about her request, something that reminded him of his younger self. "I'd be happy to help," he said finally, "but I'm not a teacher, so don't expect miracles." Emily grinned, relief washing over her face. "That's okay. Just showing me how you think would be enough." Their conversation caught the attention of Mrs. Peterson, one of the English teachers who happened to be walking by. She paused, listening intently, and then chimed in. "You know, Joe, maybe you should consider helping more than just Emily. A lot of students could benefit from your perspective." Joe chuckled nervously. "I'm not sure about that. I'm just here to clean the building, not run tutoring sessions." Mrs. Peterson smiled warmly. "Sometimes people find their purpose in unexpected places. You might be surprised by what you're capable of." Her words lingered in Joe's mind long after she walked away. Over the next few days, more students started approaching him, asking for advice or tips on solving difficult problems. At first, Joe tried to keep things low-key, offering quick suggestions during breaks or after school. But as the requests grew, he began setting aside specific times to meet with them, using an empty classroom for informal study sessions. Word of these impromptu lessons reached Principal Roberts, who called Joe into his office once again. This time, the principal's tone was less formal and more enthusiastic. "Joe, I've been hearing some incredible things about what you're doing with the students," he said. "They're saying you're helping them see problems in a whole new way." Joe shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I'm just trying to lend a hand where I can. It's nothing special." Principal Roberts shook his head. "On the contrary, it's very special. You're making a real difference here. Have you ever thought about expanding this? Maybe leading workshops or creating a program?" Joe blinked, caught off guard by the suggestion. "Workshops, me? Why not?" the principal replied. "You clearly have a talent for teaching, even if it's not in the traditional sense. We could call it Think Outside the Box. A series of sessions where students tackle challenging puzzles and learn creative problem-solving skills. It would be a great addition to our extracurricular offerings." Joe wasn't sure what to say. The idea of standing in front of a group of students and leading a structured activity felt daunting. He had spent so many years blending into the background that stepping into the spotlight seemed unnatural, but at the same time, he couldn't deny the sense of fulfillment he felt when he saw a student's eyes light up after understanding a concept they'd once found impossible. After some thought, Joe agreed to give it a try. Principal Roberts was thrilled and immediately began spreading the word about the new initiative. Flyers were posted around the school, announcing the first session of Think Outside the Box, scheduled for the following week. To Joe's surprise, nearly 50 students signed up within the first 2 days. When the day of the workshop arrived, Joe stood nervously outside the designated classroom, clutching a stack of papers filled with puzzles and brain teasers. The room was already filling up with students, ranging from freshmen to seniors, all chatting excitedly about what to expect. As Joe stepped inside, the chatter died down, and every eye turned to him. He cleared his throat, feeling unusually self-conscious. "Hi everyone, thanks for coming today. I'm Joe, and we're going to spend the next hour working on some fun challenges. Nothing is impossible if you approach it the right way, so don't be afraid to experiment." To his relief, the students responded enthusiastically. They dove into the activities with energy and curiosity, tackling each puzzle with determination. Joe moved around the room, offering hints and encouragement whenever someone got stuck. Watching them work together, sharing ideas and cheering each other on, filled him with a sense of pride he hadn't felt in years. One particularly memorable moment came when a group of 3 students solved a notoriously tricky riddle. Their faces lit up with excitement as they realized they'd cracked the code, and the entire room erupted in applause. Joe couldn't help but smile, knowing he had played a part in sparking that moment of triumph. As the workshop drew to a close, several students lingered behind to thank Joe. "This was awesome," one boy said. "I never thought I'd enjoy solving puzzles, but now I want to do more." Another girl added, "You made it seem so easy. Like I never realized how much fun it could be to think differently." Hearing their feedback reassured Joe that he was on the right path. For so long he had doubted his own abilities, convinced that his role was limited to maintaining the school grounds. Now he understood that his potential extended far beyond mops and brooms. He had a gift, one that could inspire others and make a lasting impact. Over the weeks that followed, the workshops became a regular fixture at Lincoln High. More students joined and even some teachers attended, eager to learn from Joe's unique approach to problem solving. The school buzzed with renewed energy, as if Joe's success had ignited a spark of possibility in everyone around him. Principal Roberts noticed the change too. Test scores began to improve, particularly in subjects like math and science where critical thinking was key. Attendance at the workshops remained high, and students who had previously struggled academically showed remarkable progress. It was clear that Joe's influence was reaching far beyond the confines of the classroom. Still, Joe remained humble, deflecting praise whenever it came his way. "I'm just doing what I love," he would say. "If it helps someone else along the way, that's a bonus." But deep down, he knew that what he was doing mattered. Every time a student thanked him, every time he saw someone conquer a challenge they once thought insurmountable, he felt a profound sense of purpose. Solving the impossible IQ challenge had been a turning point, not just for him, but for the entire school. Little did Joe know, his journey was far from over. The ripple effects of his actions were only beginning to unfold, and soon they would touch lives in ways he couldn't yet imagine. As the weeks turned into months, Joe Miller's presence at Lincoln High School continued to grow in ways no one could have predicted. What had started as a quiet act of solving a puzzle had blossomed into something much bigger. Think. Outside-the-box workshops became a cornerstone of the school's culture, drawing students and teachers alike. Even parents began hearing about Joe's impact, with many expressing gratitude for the positive changes they saw in their children. For Emily Thompson, the sophomore who had first approached Joe for help, the transformation was especially noticeable. Before meeting Joe, she had dreaded her advanced math class, often staying up late to struggle through assignments she barely understood. But after attending the workshops, she found herself tackling problems with confidence. She learned to break down complex equations into smaller, manageable parts and to approach challenges with patience rather than frustration. Her grades improved dramatically, and for the first time she started enjoying math instead of fearing. And one afternoon, after a particularly successful workshop, Emily stayed behind to talk to Joe. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I don't think I've ever said this properly, but thank you. You've changed the way I see things, not just in school, but in life." Joe smiled warmly, though he still wasn't used to being thanked so openly. "You did all the hard work, Emily. I just gave you a little nudge." "It was more than that," she insisted. "You showed me that I'm capable of more than I thought. And now I feel like I can handle anything if I just keep trying." Her words stayed with Joe long after she left the room. He realized that what he was doing wasn't just about teaching problem-solving skills. It was about empowering people to believe in themselves. That realization deepened his commitment to the workshops, and he began putting even more effort into making them engaging and accessible. The ripple effects of Joe's influence extended beyond the students. Teachers, inspired by his unconventional methods, started incorporating similar strategies into their own classrooms. Mrs. Peterson, the English teacher, introduced creative writing exercises that encouraged students to explore multiple perspectives. Mr. Carter, the physics teacher who had initially been skeptical of Joe's abilities, began using real-world examples and hands-on experiments to explain abstract concepts. Even Principal Roberts noticed the shift, remarking during a staff meeting that the school felt more vibrant and collaborative than ever before. But perhaps the most surprising development came when a local newspaper caught wind of Joe's story. A reporter named Lisa Bennett had heard whispers about the genius janitor from a parent whose child attended Lincoln High. Intrigued, she decided to investigate further. After interviewing several students, teachers, and administrators, Lisa wrote an article titled "The Man Who Redefined Potential." The piece highlighted Joe's journey, from his humble beginnings as a school janitor to his unexpected rise as a mentor and problem-solving guru. The article appeared on the front page of the Sunday edition, accompanied by a photo of Joe standing in the hallway, mop in hand. Overnight, Joe became a local celebrity. Strangers stopped him in the grocery store to shake his hand or share stories of how his story had inspired them. Some readers even reached out to offer donations to support the workshops, while others suggested expanding the program to other schools. At first, Joe felt overwhelmed by the attention. He didn't consider himself extraordinary, and the idea of being labeled a hero made him uncomfortable. But as letters and messages poured in from people across the community, he began to see the broader impact of his actions. One letter in particular stood out. It was from a retired engineer named Harold Green, who wrote, "Dear Joe, your story reminded me of my own struggles growing up. Like you, I was told I wasn't smart enough, that I didn't belong in certain spaces. But I refused to let those labels define me, and I eventually found success in engineering. Reading about your journey brought tears to my eyes because it proves that talent and intelligence exist everywhere. We just need to look past our assumptions. Thank you for reminding us of that truth." Harold's words resonated deeply with Joe. They reinforced what he had always believed, that everyone has potential, waiting to be unlocked. He decided to use the newfound attention to advocate for underappreciated individuals, both inside and outside the school. During interviews and public appearances, he emphasized the importance of recognizing hidden talents and giving people opportunities to shine. Back at Lincoln High, the workshops continued to thrive. Students formed study groups modeled after Joe's sessions, working together to tackle difficult subjects. Peer mentoring programs sprang up with older students volunteering to help younger ones navigate challenging courses. The sense of community at the school grew stronger, fostering an environment where everyone felt valued and supported. Even the faculty dynamic shifted. Teachers who had once kept to themselves now collaborated regularly, sharing ideas and resources. Lunchtime conversations in the faculty lounge revolved around innovative teaching methods and ways to engage students more effectively. Rachel Dawson, the math teacher who had initially joked about Joe attempting the puzzle, became one of his biggest supporters. She often joined the workshops, marveling at how Joe's simple yet profound insights could unlock understanding in even the most reluctant learners. Despite the growing recognition, Joe remained grounded. He continued his duties as a janitor, taking pride in keeping the school clean and welcoming. To him, the mop and broom were symbols of his dedication, not signs of limitation. When asked during an interview why he hadn't pursued a career in education or another field that might seem more aligned with his talents, he replied simply, "This is my place. I may not stand in front of a classroom every day, but I'm still teaching in my own way." His humility only endeared him further to the community. People admired not just his intellect but also his character. Joe's story served as a powerful reminder that greatness isn't defined by titles or positions. It's measured by the impact we have on others. By the end of the school year, Lincoln High had undergone a remarkable transformation. Test scores were higher than ever, attendance rates had improved, and student morale was at an all-time high. At the annual awards ceremony, Principal Roberts took the stage to deliver a heartfelt speech. "This year," he began, "we've seen what happens when we challenge our assumptions and embrace the untapped potential within our community. None of this would have been possible without the dedication of one individual, someone who reminds us that brilliance can be found in the most unexpected places. Please join me in thanking Joe Miller for everything he has done for our school." Tia tia tia. Auditorium erupted in applause as Joe stepped onto the stage. He looked out at the sea of faces, students, teachers, parents, and felt a lump rise in his throat. For so long he had worked in the shadows, content to remain unseen. Now he stood in the spotlight, celebrated not for solving a puzzle, but for changing lives. When the applause died down, Joe spoke briefly, his voice steady but sincere. "Thank you all for this honor. But remember, I didn't do anything special. I just tried to help where I could. Everyone here has the power to make a difference, no matter who they are or what they do. All it takes is believing in yourself and looking for opportunities to lift others up." As he returned to his seat, the crowd cheered again, this time louder and longer. Joe knew that his journey wasn't about fame or accolades. It was about creating a legacy of kindness, curiosity, and possibility. And as he sat there, surrounded by the people whose lives he had touched, he felt truly fulfilled. Unbeknownst to Joe, however, his story was far from over. The lessons he had taught and the connections he had forged were about to inspire changes that would reach far beyond Lincoln High School. Little did he know, his quiet determination had planted seeds of inspiration that would continue to grow, touching hearts and minds in ways he could never have imagined. The months that followed Joe Miller's rise to local fame brought unexpected opportunities and challenges. What had started as a small ripple of change within Lincoln High School began to spread outward, touching lives far beyond the school's walls. People from neighboring towns, inspired by Joe's story, reached out to learn more about his methods and philosophy. Some educators invited him to speak at conferences, while others asked for advice on how to implement similar programs in their own schools. At first, Joe hesitated to accept these invitations. He wasn't comfortable with the idea of being in the spotlight, and he worried that stepping away from Lincoln High, even temporarily, might disrupt the progress he had helped create. But after much encouragement from Principal Roberts and the faculty, he agreed to share his experiences with a wider audience. If it helps someone else, he reasoned, then it's worth doing. Joe's first speaking engagement was at a regional education conference held in a nearby city. The event drew hundreds of teachers, administrators, and policymakers, all eager to hear insights from experts in the field. When Joe's name appeared on the schedule, many attendees were curious but skeptical. How could a janitor offer meaningful advice to seasoned professionals? Yet when Joe took the stage, his humble demeanor and genuine passion quickly won them over. Standing behind the podium, Joe spoke plainly, using simple language and relatable examples. He didn't rely on fancy slides or technical jargon. Instead, he shared stories from his time at Lincoln High, the struggles students faced, the breakthroughs they achieved, and the lessons he had learned along the way. He emphasized the importance of patience, creativity, and believing in each student's potential. "One thing I've learned," Joe said, his voice calm but firm, "is that everyone has something valuable to contribute. It doesn't matter where they come from or what labels people put on them. If you give them a chance and show them you care, they'll surprise you every time." His words resonated deeply with the audience. Teachers nodded in agreement, jotting down notes as he spoke. Administrators whispered to one another, discussing ways to adapt his ideas to their own schools. By the end of the session, the room erupted in applause, and dozens of attendees lined up to thank Joe personally. Many expressed gratitude not just for his practical advice, but also for the reminder that true teaching isn't about titles or credentials. It's about making a connection. Word of Joe's success at the conference spread quickly, leading to more invitations. Over the next several months, he traveled to schools and events across the state, sharing his message with increasingly larger audiences. Each time he returned to Lincoln High with fresh energy and new ideas, determined to keep improving the workshops and programs he had started. Back at the school, life continued to evolve in exciting ways. Students who had participated in the Think Outside the Box workshops became ambassadors for Joe's approach, spreading his methods to younger classmates and even organizing peer-led sessions during lunch breaks. Emily Thompson, now a junior, took on a leadership role, mentoring struggling students and helping them build confidence in their abilities. Her transformation from a shy, uncertain sophomore to a confident, driven leader served as living proof of Joe's impact. Even outside the classroom, the sense of community at Lincoln High grew stronger. Parents volunteered more frequently, eager to support the initiatives that had helped their children succeed. Local businesses donated supplies and resources, ensuring that the workshops remained free and accessible to everyone. The school board approved additional funding for extracurricular programs, citing the measurable improvements in student performance and engagement. But perhaps the most profound change occurred among the staff. Teachers who had once viewed themselves as isolated figures working in separate silos now collaborated openly, sharing strategies and supporting one another. Rachel Dawson, once known for her competitive streak, became a vocal advocate for teamwork, often crediting Joe with inspiring her shift in perspective. "He taught us that we're stronger together," she told a colleague during a planning meeting. And honestly, I think that's made all the difference. As the school year drew to a close, preparations began for the annual award ceremony, a tradition meant to celebrate achievements both big and small. This year, however, there was a special addition to the program, a tribute to Joe Miller. Principal Roberts had worked closely with students and faculty to organize a segment honoring Joe's contributions to the school and the broader community. On the night of the ceremony, the auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Families filled the rows, chatting excitedly as they waited for the event to begin. When Joe walked onto the stage to receive his award, the entire room rose to its feet in a standing ovation. For several minutes, applause echoed through the space, punctuated by cheers and whistles from students and staff alike. Principal Roberts stepped forward to present Joe with a plaque engraved with the words, "Inspiring minds, changing lives." As he handed it to Joe, he said, "You've shown us that greatness isn't defined by job titles or degrees. It's about the impact you have on those around you. Thank you for reminding us what truly matters." Joe accepted the plaque with a quiet smile, visibly moved by the gesture. When it was his turn to speak, he kept his remarks brief but heartfelt. "I didn't set out to change anything," he admitted. "I just wanted to help where I could. But seeing how far this has gone, well, it makes me believe in the power of small actions. One kind word, one act of encouragement, it can make all the difference." His speech earned another round of applause, but the real highlight came afterward. As Joe left the stage, students rushed forward to shake his hand or hug him, expressing their gratitude in person. Parents approached him too, thanking him for the positive influence he'd had on their children. Even strangers who had read about him in the newspaper stopped by to introduce themselves and share how his story had inspired them. In the weeks that followed, Joe received countless letters and emails from people across the country. Some wrote to say they had started puzzle clubs or mentoring programs in their own communities. Others shared personal stories of overcoming self-doubt, crediting Joe's example with giving them the courage to try. A few even sent photos of classrooms decorated with posters bearing Joe's favorite saying, "Everyone has potential, it's waiting to be unlocked." Despite the widespread recognition, Joe remained steadfast in his commitment to Lincoln High. He continued to lead the workshops, clean the halls, and support students in whatever ways he could. To him, the essence of his work hadn't changed. It was still about making a difference, one person at a time. One day, as he pushed his cleaning cart down a quiet hallway, Joe paused to reflect on how far he had come. From solving a single puzzle to sparking a movement, his journey had been anything but ordinary. Yet in many ways, nothing had really changed. He was still the same man who believed in looking beyond labels, in finding beauty in the overlooked corners of life. As he resumed his duties, Joe smiled to himself. He knew that the true measure of his success wasn't in the awards or accolades. It was in the lives he had touched and the seeds of possibility he had planted. And though he couldn't predict what the future held, he felt certain of one thing. The ripple effects of kindness and belief would continue to spread, reaching farther than he could ever imagine. Little did Joe know, his legacy was already taking root in places he might never see. Across the country, educators were adopting his methods, adapting them to fit their unique contexts. Students who had never met him were finding inspiration in his story, daring to dream bigger and aim higher. In classrooms, libraries, and community centers, the spirit of think outside the box lived on, carried forward by those who had witnessed its transformative power. For Joe Miller, the janitor turned mentor, the greatest reward wasn't fame or recognition. It was knowing that he had played a part in creating a world where everyone had the opportunity to shine. And in that knowledge, he found peace, purpose, and an unshakable sense of fulfillment. As the years passed, Joe Miller's influence continued to grow, though he remained as humble and grounded as ever. The workshops he had started at Lincoln High School became a model for schools across the country. Teachers and administrators visited from faraway places to observe how Joe inspired students to think creatively and believe in themselves. Some even invited him to consult on educational programs, hoping to replicate the magic he had created. Despite the growing demand for his expertise, Joe never lost sight of what mattered most: the students. He turned down lucrative offers to write books or host seminars, choosing instead to stay close to the heart of his work, helping young people discover their potential. "I'm not here for fame," he often said. "I'm here to make a difference." And make a difference he did. The graduates of Lincoln High began carrying Joe's lessons into the wider world, spreading his message of perseverance and possibility. Emily Thompson, now a college student studying engineering, credited Joe with giving her the confidence to pursue a field she once thought was out of reach. In interviews and speeches, she spoke openly about how Joe's guidance had transformed her life, encouraging others to seek mentors who believed in them. Other former students followed similar paths, using Joe's teachings to overcome obstacles and achieve their dreams. One boy, Daniel Brooks, struggled with dyslexia throughout high school, but found strength in Joe's emphasis on different ways of thinking. With Joe's encouragement, Daniel discovered a talent for design and went on to study architecture. Years later, when he accepted an award for innovative urban planning, He dedicated it to the man who had taught him to see challenges as opportunities. Joe's impact wasn't limited to academics. Many students carried his lessons into their personal lives, learning to approach problems with patience and creativity. A group of alumni formed a non-profit organization called Unlocking Potential, which aimed to provide resources and mentorship to underprivileged youth. They named Joe as their honorary founder, sending him updates on their progress and inviting him to speak at fundraisers. Though Joe rarely attended these events, preferring to let others take the lead, he felt immense pride in knowing that his ideas were making a difference. Letters and emails poured in from people whose lives had been touched by his story. Some wrote to share their successes, while others simply thanked him for reminding them that they were capable of more than they imagined. At Lincoln High, the culture Joe had helped shape endured long after he retired. New teachers arrived, eager to uphold the values he had instilled: kindness, collaboration, and a belief in every student's potential. The Think Outside the Box workshops became a permanent fixture, led by a team of faculty members trained by Joe himself. Even the janitors who replaced him joked about following in the footsteps of the legend. When Joe finally decided to step back from his role at the school, it was with mixed emotions. On one hand, he was ready to enjoy a quieter life, spending time with his family and pursuing hobbies he had neglected over the years. On the other hand, leaving behind the place where he had made such an impact felt bittersweet. But as principal, Roberts reminded him during a farewell gathering, "You'll always be part of this school, Joe. Your spirit is woven into its foundation." The ceremony held in Joe's honor was unlike any other. Hundreds of people attended, including current and former students, teachers, parents, and community members. Speeches were given, tears were shed, and laughter filled the air as stories about Joe's kindness and wisdom were shared. At the end of the evening, a plaque was unveiled in the main hallway, bearing the inscription, "In gratitude to Joe Miller, who taught us to see beyond limits and unlock the extraordinary within ourselves." After retiring, Joe settled into a peaceful routine. He spent mornings tending to his garden, afternoons reading books on philosophy and mathematics, and evenings reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. Occasionally he received invitations to speak at events or meet with educators, but he accepted only those that aligned with his desire to stay low-key and authentic. One day, while flipping through a magazine, Joe stumbled upon an article about a new initiative aimed at redefining education. The program emphasized creative problem-solving, collaboration, and fostering self-belief, principles Joe recognized immediately. What surprised him most, however, was the name listed as the program's inspiration: Joe Miller. He chuckled softly, shaking his head in disbelief. "They're still talking about me," he muttered to himself, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. It amazed him how something as simple as solving a puzzle had sparked a movement that continued to grow. Yet he knew the credit didn't belong solely to him. It belonged to everyone who had embraced his message and carried it forward. As the seasons changed, Joe found joy in the small moments, watching flowers bloom in his garden, hearing birds chirp outside his window, and receiving letters from former students sharing their latest accomplishments. Each note reminded him that the seeds he had planted years ago were still bearing fruit. One crisp autumn afternoon, Joe received a letter unlike any he had gotten before. It was from a young woman named Sarah, who introduced herself as the daughter of Harold Green, the retired engineer who had written to Joe years earlier. In the letter, Sarah explained how her father's admiration for Joe had inspired her to become a teacher. She described her first year in the classroom, filled with challenges and triumphs, and expressed her gratitude for the example Joe had set. "I may not have met you in person," Sarah wrote, "but your story has shaped my life in ways I can't fully put into words. Thank you for showing me and so many others that greatness isn't defined by titles or wealth, but by the lives we touch and the legacies we leave behind." Reading the letter, Joe felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He realized that his journey hadn't just changed individual lives, it had created a chain reaction, inspiring generation after generation to strive for better, dream bigger, and care deeper. Years later, when Joe passed away peacefully in his sleep, the community mourned the loss of a beloved figure. Obituaries celebrated his contributions, highlighting not just his achievements but also his humility and compassion. At his memorial service, dozens of people stood to share stories of how Joe had impacted their lives. From former students to colleagues to strangers who had been moved by his story, each speaker painted a picture of a man who had seen potential where others saw none and who had devoted his life to helping others unlock it. In the years that followed, Lincoln High School established the Joe Miller Scholarship Fund, awarding financial assistance to students pursuing careers in education, mentoring, or community service. The funds came from donations made by individuals and organizations inspired by Joe's legacy. Every year, recipients of the scholarship were invited to attend a special ceremony where they learned about the man whose generosity made their dreams possible. Though Joe was no longer there to witness it, his influence lived on in countless ways. His story served as a reminder that greatness isn't reserved for those in the spotlight. It belongs to anyone willing to extend a hand, offer encouragement, or plant a seed of hope. And in doing so, Joe Miller proved that even the quietest voices can echo across lifetimes, touching hearts and changing worlds.